All right, thank you. Welcome everyone. We will start in a minute or two or less. We're just waiting for folks to log on. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We will start in about a minute or so. Thank you for your patience. All right, we seem to be having some technical difficulties. Just give us a few minutes. All right, well, I'll start. Thank you for those who joined us this afternoon for our discussion of pathway toward economic inclusions that include exit strategies, financing alternatives, and the benefits of converting to employee ownership for business owners. My name is Melvin Miller, and I have the pleasure of being the CEO of the Association for a Better New York. For those joining us for the first time as a part of our ABNY Talk series, welcome. ABNY is an organization that is celebrating 50 years this year. And what we do is we convene, we mobilize, we activate the region's public and private sectors for the continuous growth and renewal of our city, right? Our city's peoples, our city's communities, our city's businesses. And over the last year, we have used our signature programming, which includes our power events, if any of you have ever attended those, special briefings, our ABNY Talk series like today, as well as our young professional events, our ABNY Women, and our special projects, all in a virtual programming format to bolster civic engagement for all New Yorkers. Now more than ever, it is important to keep engaged with New Yorkers and talk about the options to make sure that our city continues to grow, but grows equitably and inclusively. It is our mission here at ABNY to use us as a forum where government officials and private sector leaders come together to work on solutions to the city's most pressing economic and social problems. And we continue to do this by incorporating a comprehensive and diverse view of the issues and challenges facing New Yorkers and help to solve the problems and the challenges to make sure that New York City is a better place for all those who live, work, and visit. And as the city recovers from the economic and social ramifications of the last year, we have really focused on three areas. One is to ensure that there's significant investment in the dynamic and diverse people who make up this great city. Two, to strengthen the neighborhoods and communities throughout all 5 boroughs. And 3, to support and advocate for small and large businesses that keep New York City a leader of innovation. And that's what brings us here today, to talk about an option for businesses looking to not only sell some or all or part of their businesses and help build wealth for themselves and their employees, but to create a bit of cash reserve and contribute to the equitable growth and recovery of our city. Investing in those that have invested in you, your employees. The pandemic has really changed how small businesses think about their future. Today's discussion will hopefully help business owners keep their doors open and increase financial security. That's why we are all here on this panel to talk to those today. Owners to owners help businesses explore the option of selling their company at a fair market price while preserving jobs and sustaining wealth in our communities. ABNY has teamed up with Deputy Mayor Phil Thompson, Brown Hatchett Williams, Capolino and Company, HR&A Advisors, Next Home Platinum Properties, NYBB Group, and the Stewardship Masters to create a steering committee to launch an outreach campaign to those organizations that we've invited here today that support, advocate, and advise businesses looking for innovative ways to grow and thrive beyond the ongoing pandemic. Today's event is brought to you by Capolino, HR&A Advisors, and Owners to Owners, with leading ownership transition experts who you will hear from on this business stabilization or succession planning strategy. Before I turn it over to our host, I'd like to really acknowledge Carl Weisbrod from HR&A, who's also on our Owner to Owner Steering Committee and co-presenting today. He has joined us, he is here, thank you so much. And I just wanna thank all of our supporters who've really stepped up to be a part of today's event. Now on to our host, Travis Terry. He is the president of Capolino and has helped build Capolino into one of the largest municipal lobbying firms in the United States. For over a decade, Travis has been an advisor to some of New York City's most well-known corporate and nonprofit organizations, such as UPS, Intersection, Macy's, AMC Network, Rudin Management, and the Guggenheim Museum. Travis is the perfect person to lead today's discussion because he knows business and he knows what's best for New York City and New York State. He has helped raise hundreds of millions of dollars in public sector funding for New York City-based nonprofits, gained project approvals for major land use projects, including the development of the former St. Vincent's Hospital campus, and many, many, many other projects. And he continues to work with businesses seeking to expand, improve, or launch in the city of New York. This is all very impressive. However, what I like most about Travis is that he is a member of the ABNY Steering Committee and he lives in my home borough of Queens. And with that, zoom over to you, Travis.
Oh, thank you so much, Melva. You're gonna make me blush. Of course, Mel and I are always talking about the brilliance of Queens. So thank you, I really appreciate it. And good afternoon, everyone. And again, Mel, thank you for that really kind introduction. I should hire you as my agent or something. It's really great to be here and always such a privilege to team up with ABNY. Just an amazing organization that I'm so fond of. Our good friends at HR&A Advisors, who we've long collaborated with, and Carl and his team, just an incredible organization. And to be part of the Owner to Owners campaign. As Melva mentioned, I'm Travis Terry. I have the privilege of serving as president of Capolino, and as she mentioned, we are what we like to call an urban strategy firm that combines lobbying, finance, and sort of traditional management consulting to really help our businesses thrive. And we're always looking for creative and thoughtful ways to do that, whether our clients are big or small. And much of our focus these days has been on economic recovery, and in particular on inclusive economic growth. And I just want to put a plug in for the op-ed that Melva and I put into Cranes earlier last week with Greg Bishop and Joey Ortiz about ways in which companies could support those efforts to not just help New York recover, but recover justly and fairly. I'll just finally say, like I said, we are working with our clients to explore new ways to grow, new ways to thrive, and frankly, new ways to sustain themselves. And when I learned a little bit more about the Owner to Owners program, it was something that we were intrigued about, that we shared internally and with clients. And there's some interest in it. And I think that for the folks here today, would encourage you to hear what the presentation has to say, what all the aspects are, what the opportunities are. And even if it doesn't work for you, to spread the word, because it may work for another company, because I think that there is some real interest here. Okay, with that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Melissa, to you, right?
Yeah.
And the Owner to Owners team to present the intricacies of the program. We will later hear from Deputy Mayor Thompson, which I'm excited to hear about. And when we talk about impressive bios, mine doesn't even come close to his. And then we'll get into a bunch of Q&A, and please place those in the chat room, and we will ask those later. So Melissa, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Travis and Melva. I'm honored to be in this company today. So my name is Melissa Hoover. I'm the Executive Director of the Democracy at Work Institute. We're a national organization with a footprint in New York City. And we're one of the partners in the Owner to Owners initiative. So Owner to Owners is an employee ownership New York City initiative. We connect business owners with experts to facilitate a sale of their business to employees. So this helps transition small businesses to full employee ownership. In practicality, what that means is we have a hotline and a website and a team ready to respond to inquiries from business owners. We're partnered with experienced technical assistance providers who you'll hear from later in this presentation. We launched in late 2020 with an announcement from the mayor and the deputy mayor. Since then, we have gotten hundreds of phone calls and inquiries from business owners and from some employees who are interested in transitioning their businesses to employee ownership. Just a quick gloss: an employee-owned business is a business that's owned by the people who work there, sharing the risks and rewards of that entrepreneurship. The model has been used for decades to support succession planning, exit planning, to improve business productivity, to reward employees for their contributions to the business's value. And it's coming to the fore today in a number of places, industries, conversations, as a strategy that I think has been too long overlooked for all of the things we said, improving business productivity and saving businesses, but also stabilizing and growing locally owned economies. So we know most businesses on the market won't find a buyer, and employee ownership can be a solution for those owners wishing to sell. And in some cases for owners wishing to stay around, but expand ownership of the business. So today we are joined by Brendan Martin of the Working World and David Hammer of the ICA Group to discuss what these transitions look like and the role business advisors can play in ensuring that business owners are set up for success. We're going to really dig in to understand how you can connect to this option. So welcome, Brendan and Dave. Do you just want to wave and say hello, maybe introduce yourselves and your organizations?
Hi, everyone. My name is Brendan Martin. I'm from the Working World. We are a capital and technical assistance provider for worker-owned companies and for transitions of current companies to worker ownership. It's great to be here.
I'm David Hammer, the Executive Director of the ICA Group, and we are a business consulting firm with a focus on transition to employee-owned companies and other worker-centered companies, including social enterprise.
Great. Okay, well, let's start with the basics for the audience. So if each of you could speak to sort of what does it look like to execute a successful sale in partnership, not in competition, but in partnership with a business broker. Brendan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so what is the basics, what's involved in partnering with a business broker? First, it's like any partner, you have to understand what their motivations are, understand where they're coming from. Their job is to get businesses sold. That's great, because that's what we want to do. We want to have businesses transition. There's a lot of reasons we're doing this work that were really well outlined in the beginning of this presentation about the need for equitable recovery, et cetera. Those will matter to anyone that you talk to who cares about their city, but it's really important when you're first meeting the broker, they understand that you're looking to actually buy a company and you have cash to do that. And secondary is going to be worker ownership. It's going to be the values of it, but they need to understand that that's usually needs to lead. So it's very important that that you establish that part of the relationship right away. they're going to need to understand that you're serious and that that you have the resources necessary to do the conversion, that you have the business understanding. They need to not, their second motivation is to do transitions quickly and to do enough of them to stay in business. So they need to know that you can actually close the deal, and that you have the resources to do that. It is also important to, while you want to establish that you have the basics that it's going to take to really convert a business, as you've done this before, the specifics of your needs, the diligence might be different. We can get into this later, but when we talk about the strengths and weaknesses of worker-owned conversion, sometimes brokers and owners are used to being bought by another business owner, or say private equity, not as commonly. The most common purchaser is another business owner who owns the same kind of business, and they may even know that business because they've been in competition for years. They can usually make the deal close like that. They can just look at their books and close it because they know how to dig through it. It will take us longer than those business owners. We also have to figure out how the workers are going to take it over. So we do explain early on that while the worker ownership is a very serious practical tool, and we have all the resources to make it happen, we do need to work in partnership with the owner to make this happen. And it won't take a week or two, it might take a few months. That's the basics. We can go into more details of strengths and weaknesses, but that's the basics of beginning a relationship with the broker.
Great. Dave, do you want to take a crack at the same question about what it looks like to execute a successful sale in partnership with a broker?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would echo what Brendan said. I think he captured it right. I think one of the things that we've encountered working with brokers on a sale to employee ownership is when things go well, and this is I think probably true in any transaction, but when things go well, it's when people sort of expectations and objectives are really aligned. And where they don't go well, where people feel like this wasn't a good process, is where they don't. So patience is a big piece of that. It like as Brenda said, it will take a little bit longer. We are this process is it's as though somebody with sort of less experience in the nuts and bolts of this particular business is coming in and helping facilitate that sale. And so there's a challenge in understanding what the books are, what the revenue model is. That diligence piece is really critical, because the situation is that we've got capital providers who are bringing the capital to this, and you've got a group of workers. And if those workers are ready and those capital providers understand, like, that combination can be really great. But the capital providers need to understand the risk, and the workers need to understand what they're taking on. And so that takes some time to sort of build that that relationship. The one thing I will say is, in our experience where things have gone really quickly and smoothly has been situations where a business has been on the market for a while, and a broker will sort of runs across us and winds up reaching out to us and says, look, this is a business that does have really strong fundamentals. It can work, but it's not a great, it's not getting the bites it needs to. Maybe that's a price thing, but oftentimes it's there's sort of other underlying things that are sort of the cause of that. Employee ownership is a great fit for that. Where the other place where I'd say employee ownership is a great fit is when when a broker's got knows an owner who sort of has a really engaged workforce and who's built sort of an ownership culture and is sort of thinking about this. It's sort of a no-brainer that's a great choice for that. So I'd say it's really when those sort of that understanding is really aligned and connected.
So following up a little bit on that aligned understanding, I'm curious, what convincing do business owners need to know that their employees are legitimate buyers? Many business owners may not be used to thinking about their employee pool as a possible owners of the business. So what mechanisms in your experience make this kind of purchase possible? And if you have any examples to share, that would be great.
Sure, and we can switch up the order if you want to start, but I can start going right now. back to the cash available, the first thing they will say is, do they have the money to do it? I'm pretty sure they don't. They'll know they'll know pretty well the finances of their employees, and rarely do employees get paid well enough that they could buy their own company. It's just almost never the case, except for maybe some top management. The second thing is, do they actually have the skills to run it? They'll want to know that. So us coming in as a partner has been always absolutely essential for selling to, except for the few occasions, like there's some that kind of David talked about where there's great alignment between the owner wanting to sell to workers. And sometimes they execute these on their own, they just want a little technical support. By and large, especially ones that are already working with brokers or haven't already had a move towards trying to sell to their workers, those are going to be the two biggest questions. So as I mentioned initially, that we have the financial resources to do it. Where does this money come from? How would there be enough money? They want it. That's what they always want to know. That's usually the number one thing if they're looking to sell their company. Rarely do we give 100% down though. So they're going to get some amount of earnout from the future. So they do want to understand, why do we think it's going to run? And they are aware of the strengths and weaknesses of their employees. And often employee ownership is quite new. So we usually make that the second part of the conversation to talk about how employee ownership is a real legitimate thing. Despite it being new for them, it is something that has worked very practically many times over and in our own experiences and around the world. So that one's going to take a little bit more working with them. Hopefully not too much. Hopefully there is some what David talked about where the owner does already understand some sense of the potential of their workers, and that there might be some amount of people engaged already in some parts of management, that it wasn't a company that was purely separated on very, very commodity level jobs and then the owner who's about to leave, that there already are some high skilled jobs that understand some of the holistic needs of the business and the strategies of it. So that is an important piece of that conversation. And it can be hard to convince an owner where that's not the situation of their company, but it is possible. So so that we're going to be there both for the finance and to help whatever the skill gap there is, that we will be there to help them through that transition is very, very important for those owners.
Yeah, I think that last point is really, really critical, that there are going to be gaps that are needed. Maybe not guaranteed, but often, very, very frequently, there are gaps in this process, whether it's gaps around sort of an operational component, whether it's gaps around the capital, whether it's gaps around sort of how to build on the governance system or on the finance system. There are things that are going to be that are gaps, that are challenges. And I think the secret of this is where groups like the Working World and like ICA and BACnet and other folks who do this kind of work, where we step in to help facilitate that gap. So it's not a kind of come in and take over and run the thing and then transition. I mean, that's a model that some folks have used, but it's more about sort of filling in, and supporting folks through that process, helping them understand, what that is, because I think people have, that the skepticism that people have is legitimate. Of like, these are folks who, the people who have not necessarily, stepped up to want to buy business. These are folks who don't necessarily have the resources to buy the business, don't necessarily have the experience like leading a business in this way, and I think without any support, the answer is like, no, this isn't going to work. But with support, it can. I think that's a key thing, is that with support, with the right kind of capital, with the right kind of governance support, with the right kind of management support, you can make that transition work. But I think that skepticism of like, folks won't be able to run it, they don't have, or probably first, they don't have the money and they won't be able to run it, is sort of where people, I think, sort of jump to. And there are cases where that is true, and it's not a good fit. I mean, I think that's the other thing, we need to stress, is that it's not always the right fit, but it's a right fit for more places than I think people assume it is.
And I'll do a little editorializing here and say that I think one of the things that I've seen be successful is actually telling the stories of places where it was the right fit. and how right of a fit it was, and what the impact that was possible out of that, and some of the unexpected or maybe expected kind of growth trajectories of those businesses once employees took them over. And we do have a story bank online. We'll get to plugging all of that later, but I think being able to show, here's a business that looks just like you, and here were the factors, here's how it lined up, is a powerful tool. Well, let's talk a little bit, we only have a couple minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about money. So what are the financial factors that influence a successful sale to employees, and what are the financing opportunities that are available?
Okay, do those together. So the financial factors, that the valuation is going to be earnings based. It's not revenue based, or it's given multiple revenue. There's got to be the earnings for it. We're not buying a company to absorb it into ours or to resell it. So there's not the same exit opportunities that private equity might have. They have to get it the old fashioned way. I mean, it's the most basic way, price to earnings ratio. And that's what we're going to go with. And for most businesses out there, it's all they could, it's the best they can hope to get. There's too many small businesses for sale, and private equity is usually interested in very targeted ones where there's consolidation going on in an industry and they hope to exit by sale. So they have to first understand that the valuation is going to be earning based. Next, we look at how much profit is there per worker. If it's got to have a significant enough impact, and that's one of the ways to track that is just literally divide those earnings by the number of workers. The next thing, the cost of replacing the owner. That owner could be very cheap or very expensive to replace. You know, I'd say, what are the financial factors? Kind of how good are their books? How clear is the owner's expenses and benefits? Disentangled from the company's books is really important. And then part of that will be then, what are they really actually paying that owner for a salary, not for their profit share? What is it going to take to replace them if they have any skill? And that's got to be really well understood, the owner, because that can make a big difference. The financial stability of the business is going to be very important. So the financial factor, when we say that the price per earnings, we're not just going to take their cherry-picked year or most recent year. It's going to be over time, because again, this business has to sustain for a while. It's going to go through a shock of losing its owner already. So we want one that's pretty nice and stable. We're not looking for industry where zowie things are happening. We're looking for solid industries that continue to deliver wealth over time. And the last is that the multiple is a reasonable multiple for the industry. So the valuation is based on a multiple of the earnings. If they want a 12 times multiple, which we've seen sometimes, even though they're a small business, because that's what's true of very large businesses in their industry, that's not going to hold. We need to be able to know that this business would generate enough revenue to pay itself back within 3 to 5 years, except for some exceptions when we go large, like when we partner with the ICA or someone else for a more medium-sized business, we might consider a higher multiple. The kind of financing available, we're available, the ICA and the working world. CDFIs in general, there are CDFIs that are getting into this game. There's even work that's been done at the federal level to try to make money available for these kinds of conversions. Workers can give some amount of buy-in. It's usually not even, it doesn't sound significant as a percentage of the overall cost of the company. If it's say 10%, that might be a significant portion of the risk, because a lot of times what you need to find is that risk capital, which could be 30% of the purchase price. You can get the other 70% from more traditional CDFI than like what we or the ICA represent. But that of that 30%, if 10 of that 30 comes from the workers, that can mean something. The last I'll mention, well, two last things, owner financing. We're not putting 100% down except for exceptional cases. We want to know the owner believes in the future of the business too. There are times we've done it, but generally we're going to say you're going to get some up front and some's going to be earned out over time. So that definitely closes the gap as well. And the owner should be prepared for that. And then there is also support from the city. You know, one of the parts of financing isn't just the purchase of the company, but all the technical work that needs to be done. Us on the phone here are supported by New York City for many years now to help perform the labor and the work that is needed, the technical labor, the legal labor, the diligence, and the follow through, very importantly, to make a conversion possible. So lots of financing options.
Great, thanks. So in our last couple minutes, Dave, I want to toss to you about the same thing, financial factors and any financing options.
Just looking at the time, do we want to jump to the last question? I feel like Brendan captured that one
great,
really well.
Great, go ahead. Yeah, so the tax advantages of a sale to employees. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So I think that's a really important thing for folks to be aware of, so that some of the sort of key tax advantages of selling to employees are one thing that's sort of an important, and this is, you know, there are really two main forms of employee ownership in the United States. There's employee stock ownership plans, or ESOPs, and worker cooperatives. ESOPs are a better fit because they're regulated. They're a better fit for larger companies with usually sort of EBITDA of at least $500,000, well, we look at $500,000. Folks are looking, generally looking at higher than that. So people, it's a bigger company that works there. The benefit, though, is that an ESOP company does not pay, an S Corp ESOP does not pay any federal income tax in proportion to the amount that the ESOP owns. So if the ESOP owns 30% of the company, it avoids 30% of its federal income tax. If the ESOP owns 100% of the company, it avoids 100% of its federal income tax. And this is not a tax loophole. This is a tax, this is like intentionally written into the law to advantage employee-owned companies. The other key thing is that if you're for a selling owner, and what that does, it creates free cash flow, right? Changes the option, the opportunities for the business, right? It really changes, sort of the dynamic of being able to pay for, for the business. Another kind of key tax break for employee-owned companies is there's a capital gains deferral, or potentially a capital gains exemption that's available for businesses that sell to an ESOP or to a worker cooperative. It's not a sort of straightforward exemption, but it is a possible thing to do. And for somebody with the right sort of financial situation, you can actually completely avoid the capital gains tax from the sale of the business. Another key piece that I think people don't focus on as much, but is really critical. Oftentimes, employee ownership transfers are stock sales. So in almost every case, an ESOP is a stock sale, and in many, many cases of worker co-op transition is a stock sale. And the reason that a worker co-op doesn't, worker co-op is not a taxable entity if it puts its profits into the paid out to its members either in paper or in cash. It's not a taxable entity. Therefore, the co-op isn't as concerned about allocating goodwill to the purchase price. So you don't have to worry about depreciation as much if you're a worker cooperative. Not having to worry about not having to worry about depreciation puts you in a position where, for a selling owner, you can actually get more net proceeds after tax for selling for a lower price to a co-op than selling the exact same thing to a conventional owner who's going to insist upon an asset sale. Now, asset sales bring challenges with them, or stock sales bring challenges with them, and so those have to be mitigated in terms of liability and all of those things. So it's not to say that it's always the case, and we've done a combination of both depending on the circumstances. But there are situations where you can actually get like a higher net proceeds after taxes from a sale to employees than you would selling the same price to a conventional owner. And so oftentimes people are sort of not aware of that. But there are, it is considered good public policy to promote employee ownership. And so there are some pretty significant tax advantages. And almost all of them are not loopholes. They are sort of written into the tax code in order to promote and facilitate these things. So the likelihood of them changing or those things getting closed up is pretty slim.
Well, thank you both for taking that deep dive into the form. We'll pause it there. I will say to those of you all listening, Owner to Owners is available online. We'll put our website, our email in the chat. We connect business owners with a buyer they didn't know existed, and we provide support for the success of the deal. And we're available to talk to your group, to business clients, to anybody you want us to talk to. We'll pause it there and come back to a Q&A. I'll turn it back over to Travis for now.
Terrific. Melissa, David, Brendan, that was fantastic. Thank you for all of those insights, for describing this opportunity in such detail, and for answering some burning questions. I hope folks will ask additional questions. I see a few coming through on how to explore this opportunity, and we're going to get to those right after our special guest, Deputy Mayor Thompson, which it is now my distinct pleasure to introduce. As the Deputy Mayor Thompson was a visionary about this campaign. I also just have to say, I know Melba said a lot of nice things about me, but my bio, again, doesn't compare at all to what the deputy mayor has done in his life. And we're still thankful for everything you've done for all of us. As deputy, just quick background, as deputy mayor for strategic policy initiatives, he is responsible for spearheading a diverse collection of priority initiatives. This includes Democracy NYC, the Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprises Program, the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development, and the Young Men's Initiative. His agency portfolio, because the initiatives were not enough, includes the Department of Youth and Community Development, the Department of Small Business Services, the Commission on Human Rights, the Department of Veteran Services, the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, the Civic Engagement Commission, and the New York City Public Engagement Unit. Deputy Mayor Thompson also serves as co-chair on the city's task force on racial inclusion and equity, and as a commissioner on the city's Racial Justice Commission. Prior to joining the de Blasio administration, Deputy Mayor Thompson was an associate professor of urban planning at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's also the author of Double Trouble, Black Mayors, Black Communities, and the Struggle for Deep Democracy, published in 2006 by Oxford University Press. He's also written and worked extensively on community health planning, race and community development, and the politics of Black economic advancement. He also previously served in the Dinkins administration, just in case you had any questions about whether or not he had additional governmental experience, but he served in the Dinkins administration as Deputy General Manager for Operations and Development and in the Manhattan Borough President's Office. Deputy Mayor Thompson has received a BA in Sociology from Harvard University, a Master's in Urban Planning from Hunter College, and a PhD from the City University of New York Graduate Center in 1990. Deputy Mayor, again, thank you so much for leading this initiative. And thank you so much for everything that you're doing with regards to racial equality and inclusive economic development, which I know is an incredibly important topic, especially these days as we come out of the COVID pandemic. And all, of course, for your focus on employee ownership. It's a privilege to be a part of this discussion with you. And now I turn the floor over to you for some remarks. Thank you again.
Well, thank you. That was a very gracious introduction. My mother would have loved it. And thank you, Melva and ABNY, for hosting this conversation. I think it's important that ABNY is engaging this topic of employee ownership because, as others have said, it's an equitable approach towards recovery, and also it's innovation in business strategy. And as we recover from COVID-19, the city is going to create many new businesses in the green tech industry. And there will be many more businesses created in advanced manufacturing and other kinds of technical fields, because I believe we're only at the beginning stages really of transition from the analog and old industrial economy into a fully digital and kind of, you know, everyone wired kind of economy. And that's going to change how we live. So there are going to be a lot of businesses created, and they don't have to be done as they were in the past. They could be done to have a lot more employee worker voice, power, and equity. Employee owners, as others probably said, are more likely than other workers to stick with a business. They are more likely to put their souls into the business. Productivity tends to be higher. Employee owners also tend to benefit financially from being owners. And employee owners have a role in making business decisions, which means they have to learn how to work through issues with other employee owners about how to run the business. And these are the very same qualities that create good habits of citizenship that the city needs generally and that the nation needs generally. Employee ownership, as was said earlier, is a good way of keeping good businesses in business. And we have found that a majority of business owners interested in selling their businesses don't have an owner. Don't have a buyer. So selling your business to your employees can be a great option. Also, employee ownership is one way of helping to close the racial wealth gap. And I will say, frankly, that after almost 50 years of MWBE programs, African Americans, for example, own 3% of the nation's wealth, which is the same percentage they owned in 1868, 3 years after slavery. And since the early 1970s, there have been over 10,000 Black elected officials elected to various positions in government, but the Black-white income gap is the same as what it was since the 1950s. And the Black-white wealth gap, racial wealth gap, is actually the same as it was in the mid-1980s. And so I think it's time to explore some new strategies when it comes to closing the racial wealth gap. And it's been for many low-income groups around the world, pooling resources, sharing, cooperation has always been an important strategy. And for African Americans, it's exactly how they built Black churches all across the country only decades after slavery, when no one had personal wealth. Nonetheless, they were able to build these buildings all nationwide. In addition, widespread property ownership is what the American dream has always been about. It's what Thomas Jefferson and others argued for. But from the days of slavery onward, it's been a struggle to realize that dream. And we're a long way from there now. Lastly, as Terry mentioned, I spent 19 years at MIT, and there are 1,000 faculty. By statute, it's limited, and over 700 faculty affiliated businesses all around MIT. And the majority of those businesses are cooperatives. And, average size, I believe, is around 12. And this is where a lot of invention takes place. And then many of the bigger companies like to cluster around the cooperative so they can have first dibs at, buying the inventions. But that, the reason why so many of those businesses are cooperatives is because the workers in those businesses are highly skilled, highly trained, and they can work anywhere. And they want to own the part of the business where they work, and they also want to have voice in what happens on the job. And so cooperatives really works well for them. And I think more and more as the workforce becomes, better trained, better educated, as the new economy develops more and more, the knowledge economy, more and more workers are going to want to have a say on the job and have an ownership stake. So I actually think that employee ownership is something that's going to grow, and it's also more equitable than what we're seeing now, where CEO pay is on average over 300 times what ordinary workers make. So I think that's going to be part of the change that we see in this country, and hopefully New York will be in the forefront. Now, as was mentioned, New York City in our owner to owners program, we're offering up to 10,000 in services. We've had over 27,000 visits to our website. I over 130 businesses have been assessed for worker ownership, and I believe 15 or so are in final stages. So we're getting interest from owners who like the idea of potentially selling to their employees when it comes time for them to retire and move on. And so this is something we want to continue to grow, and hopefully the next mayor will stay on that same track. So I'll stop there and leave time for Q&A, but thank you for inviting me to speak today.
Deputy Mayor Thompson, thank you so much for those remarks. I learned a lot, and if you ever go back into teaching, please let us know, because I'm taking your class. Could learn a lot. And thank you for pursuing this effort and for your early success on this, because it's great to hear that it's really starting to resonate in the business community and people starting to take it seriously. And you know, it's really important, which kind of gets to my first question, one of the first questions that's been asked, and would love to hear some thoughts around this, which is around successful case studies. I think, you know, as certainly as we advise companies, and even for our own companies, whenever we try to take some new initiative, it's always good to hear what has worked and what hasn't worked in other situations. So any thoughts on, if you could just sort of explore some successful case studies on owner to owners?
This is open to anyone on the panel, I assume.
Yes, absolutely. I should have said that before. Yeah, please. Melissa, Brendan, David?
Well, let's hear about Brooklyn Stone and Tile, Brendan.
Sure. I mean, it's a great example. I'll tell a couple, quick example. It's a 30-year-old business that sold countertops. They came from old stone cutters who know how to really, it's a real skill, a real manufacturing skill, from traced all the way from Italy through Venezuela and eventually into Brooklyn. And they'd been around for about 30 or so years and were in retirement. It was a perfect example. And we're having trouble selling the business until worker ownership came about. We took the assets of the business, workers, other resources, and started Brooklyn Stone and Tile. It's a great example also of collaboration between city and business. It's in the Brooklyn Navy Yards, which is, folks know, as a place that has been set aside for high-end manufacturing and other kinds of wealth creation and positive wealth creation in the city. And they found a really good home for Brooklyn Stone and Tile. They share space with another manufacturing company, and they're much closer to their customers than they used to be. They used to be out pretty far away, just at the edge of the city. So it's run by workers who worked in sales and management, but none of the people who used to run it. Their revenues have grown every year. COVID was a really hard time for construction, but they managed to stay in business while a lot of their competitors closed their doors. They've got one of the most vibrant sales teams that are really guided by the workers that I've ever seen. And their entire value proposition was created by every one of the workers. And I think it's been stronger since they brought even the floor workers in that process. If anyone is doing any building in New York City, whereas it's gotten really hard to find people, they got capacity. Call them up, Brooklyn Stone and Tile. They are one of the fastest turnarounds there are, and it's easy to visit them. I could tell other stories. There's a Child's Place which is a 30-year-old business, which is now just getting to convert after a number of years working with us on exploration. It's a 5-story daycare that's been around for 30 years, or a childcare business with already over 60 teachers and hundreds of students. These are just some examples of some businesses in New York that have worker ownership's become the pathway, instead of closure, to become a succession of that legacy, those jobs, and that impact in the community.
I want to kick it to Dave, but also just briefly jump in on a Child's Place, multi-generational Black-owned business serving Black community and sitting on real estate that certainly, if it were not transitioned to employee ownership, would be changed in nature, and the business likely would cease to exist and serve the community. So I think things where you see a multiple win, employee ownership is often sort of holding is a container for those multiple wins, and a Child's Place is both of those are great examples. Dave, do you want to speak to any of your sort of case study examples here?
Yeah, I mean, I could just talk briefly about one of the companies we're working with right now that is sort of going through the process of finalizing of the sort of designing the sort of management transition and the governance transition and the lining up the financing. It's a company they've sort of been talking about their process publicly through the owners to owners. It's a company called Green Mountain Graphics. So this is a second generation print sign making company. And the owner, he was one of these folks who was sort of looking and saying, trying to get, want to get out, want to be done. And, was open to the idea of employee ownership, was open to the idea of selling to anyone. Wasn't sort of, didn't come to this with a sort of a sign of like, oh, this is the thing I want to do, but really about like, finding the best fit for him. And yet in that process of sort of exploring employee ownership, and we sort of got through the idea like, oh yeah, these folks are, they could take over this, these are the people these are the skills and the trainings we need to do and to get people to the space. Really sort of saw that there's a long legacy, that legacy that his parents started when they started the business, could continue on. And there's some videos with Eric, the selling owner from that company on the owner to owners .nyc website.
Terrific, thank you. Next question. What types of businesses are the best fit for this? Are there any particular, it's a multi-part question, I should have mentioned that beforehand. What type of businesses are the best fit for this? Are there any particular industries? Are there businesses that are not good fits for employee ownership? Thoughts?
I'm happy to jump in there.
Yeah, please.
Go for it. Yeah, you go first.
I would say that I wouldn't say there are industries that are a bad fit or a good fit for employee ownership. I think it's something that exists across industries, right? So there are retail stores, there are construction companies, there are manufacturing companies, there are professional service firms. There are, it really does run the gamut. The thing that really sort of, really drives it is the, does the business have the ability to, continue on? And so, with employee ownership. So, looking at retail or restaurants are, really good example. If you're a restaurant with, really, really high turnover, an employee ownership isn't going to be a good fit for you in all likelihood, because you don't have that depth of, people to step in and take that on, right? So much of that work is sitting with one or maybe two people. But there are restaurants where, you've got a deep bench of people who've been there for a long time, who really understand the supplier relationships, understand the customers, understand the processes, understand all of these things, and they're ready to step in to take on that role. And so it's, it really does kind of run the gamut. There are, it's, when you include employee stock ownership plans and worker cooperatives, I don't actually know if there's a kind of an industry where there are not, there's not employee ownership. I don't think there may not be an employee-owned hospital, but there are.
In Argentina, we have one.
Yeah, see, but there are plenty of employee-owned healthcare companies. So healthcare, one of the biggest worker cooperatives in the United States, Cooperative Home Care Associates, is in the Bronx. So it's a, I think from an industry perspective, there's, really any business. There are more, there are a large number of manufacturing and construction, professional services, and retail businesses. So there are a lot of examples of that. But it's, it really runs the gamut.
I have to leave in a minute, but I just wanted to say that I think wherever you can find highly motivated workers and employees, that's really a great start. In addition to everything else, like people have to really want to make that commitment. And I just wanted to tell a brief story that Valerie Jarrett, who was senior advisor to Obama, her grandfather was a man named Robert Taylor. If you know Chicago, there used to be something called the Robert Taylor houses, which was like almost a mile long public housing development. But Robert Taylor was an architect. He was the first Black architect to graduate from MIT. And he was asked by Booker T. Washington to design a Black college in Alabama, in Tuskegee, Alabama. And so he went down there and found out they had no money to build the college. But they had a lot of motivated young people. And so what he did, he organized them into a brick making cooperative. And they made bricks and they sold bricks all over. And literally, that's how they generated the resources to build Tuskegee University, which, you know, was a major success until this day. And so that's what, you know, I think if you have motivated people, then cooperative strategies and getting workers to work together, it can compensate for a lot of weaknesses on a balance sheet if you have that kind of motivation. So thank you. I'm sorry I have to leave now with such a great
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you so much,
Mayor.
Mayor Thompson, for joining us. You are the best. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I learned a lot already. That's it's an amazing story. This last question, Melvin, I know we're running up against time, but, and Brendan, if you want to jump in on this question, on the last question, please do. I just also wanted to ask about the ongoing role of the owner. I think that you'll have a lot of skeptical owners worried about, you know, I'm just handing off the generations of, you know, spending my life sort of building this business, handing it off to employees. And I was just wondering if you could comment a little bit on the ongoing role of the existing owner.
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things real quick. I'll try to make them brief.
Yeah,
sort of that in the last question, kind of wrap it up from our side. I mean, industries, it's real, like Dave said, actually any industry has worked. Even industries with high turnover, cooperative home healthcare is an industry with incredibly high turnover that turned out they made it work. So we just, the biggest challenge we have, and this goes to that skepticism question, is that people don't know about this. So even the questions Melissa asked in the beginning, you know, what do they ask you? What are the problems? Like, do they have the money? Can they do this? The fact that worker ownership isn't known means we have to do a PR campaign and public education campaign before we even get to do all the technical work. The more that people understand this, the more that they've heard the stories like the ones that Deputy Mayor Thompson will tell, the more they know about Mondragon and other businesses, the easier it is for us. Also, for this broader ABNY network, you know, to letting the world know about worker ownership, that it's not an exotic, magical thing, but it's actually a very real, practical thing that when you put, you know, elbow grease into it, works. The more they know that, the easier our job is. And one of the reasons we need, so Dave and I will tell you about how, well, it's going to be better if the industry is like this, is because we need everything on our side because we're up against so much in trying to do these conversions. The more they become well known and are out there, the workers know they're real, the vendors know they're real, the customers know they're real, the owners know they're real, the easier our job becomes, the more that you could see worker ownership anywhere. The ongoing role of the owner, usually we want them quite deeply engaged. There's a lot of intellectual capital that they've got. They know their biggest customers. They know the quirks of them, things like that. We want them engaged, and that goes along with the owner financing. We're going to ask them to stay engaged and motivate them by saying, you know, they'll get an earnout, which could only be the more they help the company succeed, the better they might do. There are a few occasions when it doesn't make sense. The owner kind of already stepped away. Great place to convert if the owner's already gone. The owner might have may not actually be helping anymore. They had an old approach, and actually they've had new, you know, people that are doing it new ways now. But for the most part, we love to have an owner engaged. We are looking for this is a marathon being run at a couple 100 miles an hour, and you need to hand that baton off nicely. So we say, no, hold on, don't worry. It's going to be a 45-minute baton handoff. Okay, you're going to be there to make sure it's really firmly in grip of your other runner before you stop running. Dave, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that captured it absolutely right. You know, I guess the one thing I would just add, you know, really simply on that is, if an owner is looking to leave and they're looking to sell to someone who can come in and, you know, they don't have a trained, you know, sort of deep bench, that makes it incredibly difficult. right? So the intersection of an owner wanting to leave right away and not having and expecting someone who's going to come in, who's going to run, have that expertise on the operational side. That's a really difficult fit if folks don't have that. If you don't have that bench for folks at the firm, which is why we really do encourage folks to stick around and to craft that relationship on an ongoing basis. So,
great. Melissa, any final words?
No, we're at time. I'm happy to hand back to you all. Thanks.
All right, great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, HRNA. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Thompson. This is fantastic. I hope everyone learned a lot. Please pass along the word of the opportunity for employee ownership, and that there's a very easy and simple way of talking to experts and to reach out. With that, Melva, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Travis, for facilitating today's discussion during our ABNY Talks event. Melissa, thank you for sort of talking through and hosting a very informative conversation with both David and Brendan, two clear experts on this topic. And, here at ABNY, we are very clear about the importance of the message. And, you are absolutely right, Brendan, in talking about sort of the outreach campaign to give people the information so that they could sort of tell the story. And like Deputy Mayor Thompson did, told the story through stories will be really important. So the more people do it, the more people will understand that it's real. So we need you to help spread the word. That's why we convened this event today for those who are either business brokers or advisors, or who have any touch with businesses out there, or just interested in learning more about the conversation. Thank you for joining us to learn more about it so that we can then spread the word. If you want to get more information so that you are better informed when you are talking to business owners, please call the Owners to Owners team. The information is in the chat. The number is 363-6592, or you can visit ownertoowners.nyc. Also want to let everyone know, if you have businesses that you think might be really interested in this, there is an event next week, Thursday. Owners to Owners is having an event with our other partners in our steering committee on the 24th at 1 p.m. for what is employee ownership and how it can save a business. So that event is for business owners specifically. So please spread the word about that. To register to the event is in the chat. Again, if you have any questions, you can always call the Owners to Owners team, or you can reach out to ABNY. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And we look forward to continuing this campaign with each and every one of you. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.